Carrie Smith.
And I'm Emma Skip, and welcome to
It's a Death Sentence. This is a podcast that takes a lighter look at the heavier things.
So, if you want some of this... So somebody could have been dead for a week and end up with you.
Or maybe longer, and somebody might have said, oh, there's a really bad smell.
Or... A little bit of this.
I haven't got a tissue. I'll get you one. You got one. And plenty of this.
So original. Fucking hell. Then this is the show for you. Because
Life,
it's a death sentence. Hello and welcome back to It's a Death Sentence. This episode is called Over My Dead Body. We'll be looking at what happens during a post-mortem. So, first things first, why would someone have to go for a post-mortem, Carrie? What sort of deaths end up in your hands?
Well, anyone who has died unexpectedly normally come to under jurisdiction of the coroner. Sometimes we get deaths from hospital. If someone's died in hospital and the doctors that have treated them have been unable to give a cause of death.
Wow.
And sometimes if families are not happy with the cause of death from a GP or a doctor in hospital, they might come to us. They might request one.
Can I ask, is that common?
We do get quite a lot from hospital, yeah.
And this is when sorry, just to reiterate, but either it's been disputed by the family, the cause of death, or the doctors themselves aren't happy, or they are not clear on
so somebody could go into A&E, for instance, and be very unwell and pass away, and they've had if there's no obvious reason why they've passed away, they might be able to say, well, I don't feel comfortable issuing a cause of death because it could be something that is a long-term issue or something that they weren't physically treating straight away.
So, stupid question, but for our listeners, it might be one that they also have. I'm going to be that person that asks the stupid questions. But hospitals don't have the facilities to do this themselves.
They do have mortuaries. Most hospitals have mortuaries. And post-mortems can take place in a hospital. But they are usually for the purpose of teaching.
Okay. Or
sometimes hospital post-mortems are different to ones that are carried out under the jurisdiction of the coroner. So basically, if a sudden death happens in the UK and it's reported to the coroner, they then look at all the evidence and decide whether it needs a post-mortem or whether they're happy and it doesn't.
Can you refuse it if the coroner requests one?
No, you can't. It's a legal requirement to allow a post-mortem to be carried out if the coroner requests it.
So let's say, I'm going to try and find a hypothetical situation here, but somebody dies accidentally, road traffic accident. A family are quite satisfied that that's what's happened, but it ends up in your hands or with the coroner because they're not exactly sure what it was that killed the person. Even if the family are absolutely like, well, we know they were hit by a bus. They won't have a choice at that stage.
They don't have a choice because it comes into the mortuary and sometimes it can end up being a criminal case. So somebody could be to blame.
Okay. Yeah.
So they would come in and they wouldn't necessarily have an internal post-mortem. They might have a CT scan.
Okay.
So we do that. We send them for CT scans now. If it's traumatic death, so if it's a very obvious reason why, so like a car accident, or if somebody's taken their own life and it's very obvious how they've done it, i.e. hanging or something like that, they can be sent for a CT post-mortem so that they don't need to be opened up.
So when I think of a CT scan, I think of it just being for the head for some reason, but obviously a CT scan...
No, they can do
any part of the body.
For the whole body.
And so there is a machine that would do the whole body in one go if there's...
It's exactly the same as a CT scanner that you would go in.
So in those situations, a suicide or a death in a collision of some sort, it's quite normal that the body would go and have a full body CT. And that would be in the hope that it can determine the cause of death without having to do a post-mortem.
Yeah, it just confirms that they have died how we think they have died. So sometimes then they might take something like toxicology just to ensure to see if they had any drugs in their system or anything like that at that stage. But if they're having a CT post-mortem, 9 times out of 10 they do not need to be opened up to have an invasive one.
And again, for our listeners, when we talk about opened up, we are using that term exactly as it sounds. Can you describe for us, myself included, can you walk us through one? Can you talk us through what happens in postmortem? Because I think lots of our listeners will have an idea, or will have maybe even a kind of notion of what happens based on something we've seen on TV, probably something American and probably something inaccurate. So can you, talk us through, body comes to you, it arrives at the mortuary, what next?
When they arrive at the mortuary, they normally arrive because they're having a post-mortem. Their IDs are checked. We like to have 3 points of identity, minimum. That's a requirement from the Human Tissue Authority, who are the people who govern mortuaries and APTs and people who do post-mortems and look after deceased.
What an interesting name, the Human Tissue Organisation, did you say?
Authority.
Human tissue. Is that because we're just referring to a body that is no longer alive?
Yeah, and it's to do with disposal of tissue. And there was a big problem back in the day of people keeping organs and things
So I read a lot about
without permission.
Yeah.
So that's when the HTA came into authority.
Okay.
And they then provide a set of rules and regulations that we have to abide by.
Right. So sorry, we deviated there. So they come to you, you're checking all their ID, you're making sure that person is definitely that person. On occasion, presumably, you're getting somebody who's unidentified.
Sometimes we get unidentified.
And do they just stay with you until the identification can be made?
Yeah, so they wouldn't have a post-mortem until we identified who they were.
Yeah.
But we would still give them 3 identifiers. So if it was someone who was an unknown person, it could be unknown male, date of death.
Yeah.
So that's, we know they're unknown, we know they're a male, we know their date of death. We could also have their place of death. So we'd use that to identify them in the mortuary.
Until you can piece together.
Until we can get a name. Sometimes the scenes of crime unit will come in and take fingerprints and things to identify the individuals.
Gosh, okay. Wow.
So once they've had that, then we get permission from the coroner. There's a signed triage form to say we are authorised to do a post-mortem.
And you can go ahead at that point.
Yeah.
So let's rewind. Somebody comes in, you know who they are, they've been identified, you've checked all their markers and you're all satisfied it's the right person. Talk our listeners through what happens.
Normally, we the APTs, myself.
Let's tell our listeners what an APT is.
Anatomical pathology technicians.
Which is why we do the APT, because it's a really long name.
Yeah. We work alongside the pathologists. We check the deceased again when they come into the post-mortem room. At that point, then, we would do an external examination. So we're looking for any signs of injuries, any identifying features, any previous scars or surgery that may be evident from looking at the outside of the body. We're also looking at if they're unkempt, if they've maybe vomited and got sort of blood around their mouth, or if they've had a bleed elsewhere. We're looking for all sorts of things when we're looking at the.
And this is all really just external. So it's almost like a walk round, just trying to pick up on anything that's going to give you any clue as to how this has come to be.
Yeah, and we do get like background information. So we'll get like a summary about what happened to them leading up to it, where they were found. You'll get their medical records. So you've got a good idea of the person anyway. So it just sort of builds up a further picture.
I think I've just thought we've missed quite a key point here, which is not everybody is ending up at the mortuary. Not everybody's ending up at the coroner, are they? So
No.
For our listeners' benefit, could you just reiterate the 2 sort of types of death, one that is coming to you and the others that aren't?
So any other death in hospital, like 90% of the deaths probably, or even at home or in a hospice, they're expected, people may be poorly, they may have had a long illness, they wouldn't necessarily come to the coroner. Okay. So it's only people who they're not expected to die. If there's no known illness.
Yeah.
They are unfortunate in they have an accident or there's a death by accident. Any deaths in a public place would come into us.
Okay.
So if somebody died in a Tesco's, or I mean there are other stores available, Asda.
Yeah, I mean,
if they died,
choose wisely, folks. Choose wisely.
If they died somewhere
maybe
like
go
that,
for Waitrose.
probably can't afford it. If they died somewhere like that, they'd still come into us because it's a public place.
Okay.
So because we're a public mortuary.
So now I've rewound. I just wanted to make sure we've got all those bases covered. Let's go back. So they've come into you. You've done the external. You've looked for all of these. Anything that is quite apparent and external on their body. What's the next stage?
So the next stage would be for the pathologist to decide whether he or she would want a full post-mortem, so all the organs removed. They may want a limited one if they have got enough history to say this person's got a history of heart problems and it's likely that the cause of death is in their chest or in their heart, so they might do a limited one. They might, if it was a CT post-mortem, we'd still do the external and check the person's injuries and to see what we could put back together, for want of a better term.
I mean, that in itself, the phrase put back together. So let's just delve into that a little bit. Let's say we've got somebody's come in who's been quite seriously injured and family are going to want to view their body and it's not looking good. So part of your job, if I'm right in thinking this, is literally to put them back together, to make that person, the person who's come to you, to look as like they should do as possible, which would include doing some rather intricate repairs. Is that right?
Yeah, so reconstruction is part of our job.
Okay.
And that can be finer details for facial features, trying to make somebody look as much like themselves as possible.
And so do you have a photograph to work from?
Sometimes we'll get photos of the individual, but normally you can see where bits go.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do try where possible. We do try to do reconstruction.
I know that we've got a lot of GDPR around this, and we'll always be respectful of that. But could you give us an example of something that you've had to do in the past that has been a really hard thing to do in terms of making somebody look like themselves again?
I think that we have lots of cases, sadly, of people who have taken their own lives in ways where it has devastated their bodies, and those are always extremely difficult reconstructions.
Presumably you can advise family to not view.
Absolutely. If we think that the deceased is in too poor a condition to view and it will be detrimental to them or more distressing to them, then we advise to not view.
Can they insist?
They can. We can advise as best we can. They can always.
So the family will always have the last say as to whether they see that person or not.
When it comes to viewing, yes.
Wow. And has that happened in your career?
Yes.
Where you've advised against it and.
Yeah, there's people who we've been found decomposed, and really there's nothing hardly left of them, and that it would be distressing for family members to see, so you advise not to view, and sometimes people still want to see.
And their reaction to it is that of horror, no doubt.
Well, fortunately, we don't have to deal with that side of it, because
that would
somebody
else's job.
Normally, we would do viewings at our mortuary for identification purposes.
Yeah.
That's if they're unknown, or if somebody died in a road traffic accident, they were a young person and their family wanted to see them, absolutely we would facilitate a viewing. But on the whole, because it's not really a suitable environment because they're behind glass, so they can't touch their loved one. So on the whole, we generally advise them to do viewings at funeral directors, so when they're released from us,
because they're set up for it and it's a nicer environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's family friendly, isn't it? They're allowed to go in, they can touch their loved one, they've had their post-mortem, or they've had whatever they've needed to have done, and they can they're back with their family.
I always knew this episode was going to deviate because it's just the nature of it. But let me keep trying to rewind us back. Each deviation, by the way, is fascinating and will be for our listeners, so I'm not worried about that. But we have the person, the deceased, is with you. Can you talk us through physically how you are taking that body apart? Let's say this is a full post-mortem. So you've already discussed how you can have a partial one or a full one. So this is a full one. Talk us through how that looks. What's the process?
So the APT or myself or whoever's case it is would open the deceased and
how is that done? I mean, I'm asking these questions because I honestly am of the opinion that whilst it might not be the easiest thing to listen to for people, for me, they're questions that I wanted to know. I actually haven't lost somebody that has had a post-mortem. But there are so many unanswered questions for so many people. So I think that our job and our responsibility is to dispel the myths and the taboo. So go for it, Carrie. The floor is all yours, darling.
Thanks. So yeah, we use a blade to open the chest. Now you'd see a lot of Y incisions, which is like from shoulder to shoulder, straight down the middle. Normally they're for forensic cases. So for a standard post-mortem, we try and be as respectful as possible and start as low as we can so that when the deceased is dressed and their loved one won't see any stitching or anything like that. So that's why we try and go in a little bit lower. The Y incision is only done if you really have to.
Because we're not on camera, when you're pointing to yourself, just for our listeners, is this sternum area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We go straight down, past the belly button, and then it's very difficult to describe.
Okay.
Then you would sort of move the skin from where your chest is. You would sort of move it back using your blade underneath it, shimmy underneath it to expose the sternum itself. Then that's opened using a rib shears, we call them. It's like a big...
I imagine it looks like a gardening tool.
Yes, it does, yeah.
Okay.
It's a bit like that. From there, that is taken off. A section of it is taken off, the front section, and kept to one side. Then we take the organs out and we take them out in a method that's called en bloc. So we take them out in 3 separate blocks. So we've got our thoracic block, which is can include the tongue and the throat, the heart and the lungs.
Sorry to interrupt you. Why would the tongue come out?
Sometimes if someone's choked and that's why they've died, we would have to take that out.
And that's to get a really good look at the throat, presumably.
Yeah, and you can see where sometimes things are trapped.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, or where someone's aspirated on it. Okay. So you can have a real good look as to where that has gone into and caused them
So
to
this
die.
Top block is called the thoracic, did you say?
Block,
okay.
yeah, and which is your heart, mainly your heart and your lungs. And then under your diaphragm would be your second block, which is your abdominal block, which is your stomach, your pancreas, your spleen and your liver. So we take that all out together. The bowel's obviously removed separately. I normally do that second, so I take out my thoracic block and then I take out the bowel, but some people take it out first.
Is that your preference rather than the method that is it's not enforced upon you?
No, that's just, I find that way easier.
Yeah.
But most people, I think, take the bowel out first.
Yeah, okay. I have a question, just a quick question. The intestines, do they stay in or come out?
They come out, so that's what the bowel is.
And is it true that they're extremely long?
Yes, they are long. They're about 4 metres, I think. Wow. 4 metres long.
Wow. I mean, do you know this because you've stretched them all out? Have you had to do that? Actually go through the whole thing?
When we take... If the bowel needs to be inspected, then, they would open them and you would see.
Oh, that is fascinating. So, can you tell us... So, we've got these 3 blocks. We covered all 3 now, haven't we? Is that right?
No, the last block is the pelvic block.
Okay.
So that's like your bladder, kidneys, bladder, womb if you're a woman, prostate if you're a man.
Okay. So that process, how long does that take?
It varies because everybody's slightly different, and people may have had surgery which creates scar tissue, so that can mean that sometimes things are a little bit stuck down or difficult to get out. The guys that I work with have been doing it for 30 years, and some of them are extremely fast. They can do a full evisceration in like 8-9 minutes.
Evisceration being the technical term for removal of organs.
Yeah.
In how many minutes?
Maybe 8 minutes.
My goodness me.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
I think we're all fairly fast.
Yeah.
But they can be very fast.
Okay, so all the organs are out. Everything's on the table, so to speak. And who is looking at the organs then?
So then the pathologist, who's the doctor, he will look at the organs in depth to determine the cause of death.
Okay.
So he'll dissect the organs and have a look at them, and he knows what he's looking for. So he could be looking for a heart attack or an embolism or something, and he knows what he's looking for. So he or she, I keep saying he, because we've got mainly men at our place. That's why.
Okay.
But the doctor will know what they're looking for.
And so once the cause of death has been determined by the pathologist, you then have to return those organs back to the body, presumably in a order.
No, you would think so.
Okay. They can just go back in, can they?
They just
sort of pop those in.
Go back into the tummy. Yeah. So obviously the way you've opened.
Yeah.
But everything just goes into an evisceration bag, and that goes into your. So it would be impossible to put them back
because they've been disconnected from the veins and whatever.
Yeah, and they've been dissected, so they're
So they go into an evisceration bag. Did you just say?
Yeah, it's like a plastic bag.
Okay, so all the organs go back and then they just pop it back in.
Yeah.
Pop the lid back on.
And then sew up.
And then sew up. And so what's your stitching like? I mean, prior to this, had you done any tapestry or anything?
No tapestry. Embroidery, darling. My stitching's all right now. Yeah, it's good, yeah. Obviously.
I mean, it can't be a bit like... It can't be like...
It's not like darning socks.
Unless you're working with something like leather or something, I imagine it's a completely different experience to stitching anything. Because the skin is fairly thick.
Yeah, but you just take the top layer, so... But everybody's skin, again, is different. So some people have got more... Maybe might have some fluid retention, so their skin might tear easily. If they're older, they might have like that
thinning skin.
Yeah, and that sometimes can tear. So you have to be really mindful about how you're sewing somebody up and what their skin texture's like. So... that would depend on how thick you would use your twine.
I've got a childlike question now, but I'm just going to go for it. Have you ever stitched anyone up and then they leak a bit?
Well, yeah, so that's what body bags are for, really. They prevent any sort of spillage of bodily fluids. Because
and you'd have to do some very tight stitching so that there was nothing.
Well, they don't necessarily leak out of the incision, but just out of their tissues.
Okay. Right.
Like if you get swollen legs, that fluid has to go somewhere, doesn't it?
Can we also talk about, the myth or the truth about whether a deceased body makes noise?
What, like talks to you?
I mean,
they're not dead.
If they talk to you, they're not dead.
Yeah.
Or you're very gifted in some way. But I think I've heard lots of, rumours that obviously the vocal cords, if you blow up through the vocal cords, you're going to make a sound. That's what their purpose is. So if gas is being passed from the body, is it true that it makes a sound?
It can do, yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness me. How does that...
Is that freaking you out?
Is it like a kind of lowish sound?
It depends. Sometimes when you're moving stuff around, obviously, you can force air
of course.
back out through, and it could be like a... almost like a sound of someone exhaling.
Breathy rather than a tone.
Yeah. If they start going, oi! Then I've had it.
Like that, yeah. We're in the wrong place here. So, have you ever heard an actual vocal sound? Other than the breathiness, you've never heard the...
Not really.
No, okay. No. So, because I mean, you've got that kind of, when you think of the really kind of cheesy horror movies, you hear that kind of that kind of sound,
like a zombie.
Yeah. So nothing like that. And what about wind out of any other orifices?
No, you don't hear any wind out of there normally, but sort of when tummies get filled up with gas, depending on the condition of their body, sometimes their bellies can get a bit distended.
What about the poo? Poo just stay in there?
Just stays in.
Yeah, it doesn't ever pop out?
No.
Okay, well that's good, isn't it? That's nice.
Well, I mean, sometimes it happens at the point of death.
Yeah, well,
You let go of everything.
One shits oneself.
Yes,
Yeah.
darling.
Okay.
It's a bit like childbirth.
Well, exactly. Or just a bad day.
Yeah.
Just a casual Sunday, really. So from there, so organs have gone into the bag. They've been stitched back up.
Yeah.
You then it's not your responsibility to dress that person. At this point, are they then going to a funeral home?
Yeah, so we would wash them and put them in a shroud, which is a very neutral sort of gown. And then they would be ready then to go, to be released by the coroner when they're happy to say that they can go. And then that would mean they were ready to go back to the funeral home, to be viewed by the loved ones, to have a burial, to have a cremation, whatever.
And so that for you that's the end of their journey with you.
Yeah, when we release them from us, then we don't hear from them again.
Okay, well, I think that probably brings us to the end quite nicely. I would say to our listeners, if you have any further questions, Carrie is more than happy to answer them, and I imagine there's going to be quite a few, because it's really hard to think about these things and not have questions about it, particularly if you've had a loved one who's gone for a post-mortem. But at the end of the day, having a post-mortem is a legal requirement, but it's also a really good way to give the families answers to the questions they might have about how and why their loved ones have passed away, especially if it's sudden or unexpected. Post-mortems have been used for centuries to examine how the body works and has been the basis for much medical research, which in turn has helped scientists and doctors produce medication for many diseases that we have today and that we live with. I think this as well, let's just briefly touch on the fact that I know that you and I have discussed organ donation. So
yes.
I personally have donated my entire body to medical research, and it's going off to the QE. Can we just finish on, would it ever happen that a body arrives to you that's had an organ removed? It wouldn't, would it?
Sometimes people might come in from hospital and they may have had their eyes removed, which is called enucleation, I think.
Right.
I might not be saying that right.
Okay. And that would be because the eyes have been donated?
The eyes have been donated, the corneas have been donated.
And that's the most common, rather than lungs or heart or...
Yeah, normally, if they're coming into us...
Because they need to discover what's gone on.
Yeah, so but they wouldn't take anything in case that was the reason why somebody died.
Okay. Wow, yeah, so any more questions about that from any listeners, just send us it in a comment. In the next episode, we've got an interview with a listener about his experience of death and his views on the afterlife.
Yes, so, looking forward to that.
Carrie, it's been so interesting talking to you about your job. I think I'll probably never tire of listening to it. I imagine as we go on, I'm just going to probably carry on firing questions at you forevermore. For now, thank you for having us again.
Until next time.
It's a death sentence. Life, it is a death sentence.
It certainly is.
So thank you, dear listeners. If you've enjoyed our show, then please do all the stuff that will help promote us.
Like and share our podcast and follow us on socials, and please subscribe too. If you've got any feedback, it's most welcome, so please contact us.
Likewise, if there's a subject you'd like us to cover, please do get in touch, and thank you for your support.
We are dying to talk to you.